The air in the women's locker room at Forward Operating Base Peregrine was thick with the smells of damp nylon, weapon oil, and exertion. It hung in the high-altitude chill, a permanent ghost in the prefabricated metal structure. Captain Eva Rostova, leader of Operational Detachment Alpha 724, slammed her locker shut, the clang echoing off the concrete floor. Her two most trusted operators, Sergeant Kaito Tanaka and Corporal Leo Martinez, were already stripped to their base layers, their laughter sharp and loud in the enclosed space. They were young, hard-muscled, and radiated the easy arrogance of those who had never truly failed. Then the door hissed open, admitting a slice of the biting mountain wind and a woman they didn't recognize. She was older, perhaps in her mid-50s, with lines etched around her eyes that spoke of long-held focus rather than laughter. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, gray-streaked bun. She wore sterile, unadorned fatigues, the kind issued to civilian contractors or logistics personnel who never left the wire. She carried a simple black duffel bag and moved with a quiet economy that was utterly at odds with the boisterous energy of Rostova's team. She found an empty locker at the far end of the row and set her bag down without a word. Rostova watched her, a flicker of annoyance in her gaze. This was their space, their sanctuary after a grueling 2-week field exercise. The presence of an outsider, especially one who looked like a quartermaster clerk, felt like an intrusion. "Lost, ma'am?" Martinez called out, his tone laced with a mocking politeness. He flexed his bicep, admiring it in the small, polished metal mirror taped to his locker door. The woman didn't turn. She simply unzipped her bag. "I don't believe so, Corporal." Her voice was low and calm, with a gravelly timbre that suggested years of disuse or too much use in harsh climates. The simple, correct use of his rank caught Martinez off guard for a second. He glanced at Rostova, who gave a slight, dismissive shrug. Tanaka, wiping sweat from his brow with a towel, chimed in. "You must be the new supply liaison. Heard they were sending someone up to sort out Colonel Thorne's inventory mess," he grinned. "Good luck with that. The man thinks first in, first out is a combat maneuver." The woman pulled a plain gray towel and a small toiletries kit from her bag. She still hadn't made eye contact with them. "I'll keep that in mind, Sergeant." Rostova finally spoke, her voice carrying the clear, cutting authority of a young officer on a fast track. "Locker rooms for operators, ma'am. You might be more comfortable in the administrative wing. They have heated floors." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a territorial marking. She was telling the old woman she didn't belong. Finally, the woman turned. Her eyes were a pale, washed-out gray, like a winter sky over the Hindu Kush. They held no anger, no defensiveness, just a flat, unreadable calm. She looked at Rostova, then at Tanaka and Martinez, her gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on each of them. It wasn't a challenge, but an assessment, as swift and impersonal as a scanner cataloging inventory. "This locker was assigned to me," she said, her voice even. "It will suffice." She turned back to her bag, the dismissal clear. She was not intimidated, and more annoyingly, she was not impressed. For Rostova and her team, who thrived on a reputation built on controlled violence and peerless skill, being unimpressed by them was the deepest insult. Rostova's jaw tightened. She exchanged a look with her team. The old woman was an anomaly, a gray rock in their polished world of high-speed operations. They decided, in that silent exchange, that she was an object of pity, perhaps even ridicule. They would tolerate her presence, but they would not acknowledge her as part of their world. They started calling her the archivist before she had even closed her locker door. The name stuck. It was quiet, condescending, and perfectly suited to the mousy, bureaucratic presence they perceived her to be. Colonel Marcus Thorne ran FOB Peregrine with the rigid certainty of a man who believed procedure was a substitute for insight. He was a creature of checklists and slide decks, a commander more comfortable with a quarterly budget review than a topographical map. When his executive officer informed him that the liaison from CENTCOM had arrived, he sighed with theatrical weariness. Another box ticker from headquarters, sent to disrupt his finely tuned machine with questions about requisition forms and operational readiness reports. He expected a sharp-nosed major or a lieutenant colonel trying to make a name for themselves. He did not expect the quiet, graying woman his XO ushered into his office. She still wore the same sterile fatigues, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. She stood with a stillness that Thorne found unsettling. "Colonel Thorne," his XO began. "This is our liaison from command." The slight hesitation in his voice was not lost on Thorne. Thorne stood, extending a hand with practiced, patronizing warmth. "Welcome to Peregrine. Always good to have a fresh set of eyes from the Puzzle Palace. Hope the trip up wasn't too rough." The woman took his hand. Her grip was firm, her skin dry and calloused. "It was manageable, Colonel," she said. Her name, according to the travel manifest, was Sharma. No rank, no first name. Just Sharma. Contractor, then. It made sense. "Right?" Thorne said, gesturing to a chair she did not take. "Well, I've had Lieutenant Davies clear out a small office for you down by records. You'll have access to all the unclassified network drives you need. I'm sure you'll find our paperwork is mostly in order. We run a tight ship here," he smiled, the self-satisfied expression of a man who had already dismissed his guest. "Captain Rostova's team just returned from a highly successful exercise in the Northern Pass. Top marks across the board. They are the tip of the spear, the very best this command has to offer." Sharma's expression did not change. "I'm aware of Captain Rostova's team," she said. The statement was neutral, yet it carried an odd weight. Thorne pressed on, warming to his lecture. "The operational tempo here is intense. We are at the bleeding edge. I'm afraid you'll find we don't have much time for the usual bureaucratic deep dives. So, if you could streamline your audit, or whatever it is you're here for, my staff and I would be most appreciative." "My work will be efficient, Colonel," Sharma replied, her voice still a low monotone. "I only require a terminal with access to the Taxat network and a hard line to the Joint Operations Center. The office by records will be fine." The request was slightly above the pay grade of a simple auditor, but Thorne waved it away. "Done. Just try not to get underfoot. The men and women here are focused on the mission." The implication was clear. She was not. Over the next 48 hours, Sharma became a ghost on the base. She was seen in the mess hall, eating alone at a small table, her movements deliberate as she cut her food into precise, equal-sized pieces. Rostova and her team would saunter past, dropping casual, condescending remarks just loud enough for her to hear. "Hey, archivist," Martinez would say to Tanaka, "make sure you file your meal receipts. Don't want to end up on her naughty list." In the base gym, as Rostova effortlessly powered through a set of weighted pull-ups, she saw Sharma in a corner, methodically working her way through a series of quiet, grueling stretches. She wasn't lifting heavy weights or pounding a treadmill. She was focusing on flexibility and balance with an intensity that was almost unnerving. Rostova scoffed. It was the workout of an old person, designed to prevent joints from seizing up, not to build combat-effective strength. She saw fragility, not discipline. Sharma never reacted. She absorbed the slights and the derisive nickname with the same placid indifference she showed everything else. Her silence became a canvas onto which they projected their own assumptions. She was a washed-up paper pusher, a forgotten cog in the great green machine, sent to this remote outpost to live out her final years before retirement. Her presence was a quiet irritant, a reminder of the bureaucratic world they, the warriors, had transcended. They mocked her because her quiet, unassuming competence was a language they didn't speak. They understood explosive force and overt skill. They did not understand the deep, silent strength of a river that has been carving its way through stone for 1,000 years. Her refusal to be baited, to be anything other than what she was, only fueled their disdain. She was an irrelevance, and they treated her as such. The crisis arrived not as a sudden explosion, but as a slow, strangling hiss of static over a speaker. It was 0300. A bitter, high-altitude wind howled outside the JOC, rattling the window panes. Inside, The air was stale with coffee and anxiety. Colonel Thorne stood before the main holo display, a three-dimensional map of the jagged, unforgiving mountain range that bordered hostile territory. A single red icon, labeled Ghost 7, blinked ominously deep within the red-shaded zone. "What's their status?" Thorne demanded, his voice tight. A young communications tech, his face pale under the blue glow of his console, shook his head. "Still nothing but static, sir. Last transmission was 12 minutes ago. Heavy contact, ambush from elevated positions. Their primary comms are down. This is coming off Sergeant Bilal's personal beacon, and it's failing." The static hissed again, and a voice, shredded by interference and panic, clawed its way through. "Under fire. K2 Ridge. Extraction, impossible. Storm." The transmission dissolved into a piercing squeal, then silence. "Get me a weather update," Thorne barked. The meteorology officer didn't need to check his screen. "It's a whiteout, Colonel. Zero visibility, winds gusting to 80 knots. The storm moved in twice as fast as forecasted. Nothing can fly in this. Not the QRF Hellos, not the Spectres. We're grounded for at least 8 hours, maybe more." The room fell silent, the weight of the statement settling on everyone like a physical shroud. 8 hours. Ghost 7 wouldn't last 8 minutes. They were a 4-man reconnaissance team, lightly armed, compromised deep in an area crawling with insurgent patrols. Rostova and her team stood by the edge of the command floor, already kitted out in their cold-weather gear. They were the ground quick reaction force, the only viable option. But an option to do what? "Sir," Rostova said, stepping forward, "we can move. Give us a route." Thorne stared at the map, his face a mask of indecision. He was a man drowning in protocol. The standard procedure for a compromised team was air extraction. If air was unavailable, the next step was to hold position and wait. But Ghost 7 couldn't hold. To send Rostova's team in blind, on foot, into a blizzard and a confirmed kill zone, was to risk a second team for one that was likely already lost. It was a gamble his risk-averse mind could not process. "Negative, Captain," he said, his voice strained. "We don't have a clear picture. We don't know the enemy's numbers or their exact disposition. We don't even have a confirmed location for Ghost 7. Just a last known position on K2 Ridge. That ridge is 5 kilometers long. Sending you in now is suicide. Sitting here is a death sentence for them, sir." Martinez shot back, his frustration boiling over. "Stand down, Corporal." Thorne snapped, his authority fraying. The JOC was descending into controlled chaos. Officers shouted conflicting suggestions. Technicians tried vainly to re-establish communications, and the static from the speaker seemed to mock their impotence. Through it all, Sharma stood in the back of the room, near the secondary comm station she had commandeered. She hadn't said a word. She had been observing, her pale gray eyes moving from the frantic faces of the command staff to the blinking red icon on the map. She was a point of absolute stillness in the heart of the storm, both inside and out. The others had forgotten she was even there, a piece of furniture in their unfolding disaster. But she wasn't just watching. She was listening, she was processing, and she was remembering. Sharma stepped forward. Her movement was so quiet and deliberate that at first, no one noticed. She walked past the gesticulating officers and the panicked technicians until she stood beside Colonel Thorne, her eyes fixed on the holographic map. "The transmission," she said, her voice cutting through the noise with the clean authority of a surgeon's scalpel. "Play the last 30 seconds of it again. Filter out the high-frequency static and amplify the ambient low-frequency band." The young comms tech, startled, looked at Thorne for confirmation. Thorne, flustered by the interruption from the woman he'd dismissed as a clerk, just waved a hand irritably. "Do it." The tech's fingers flew across his console. The recording played again, this time stripped of the piercing squeal. The panicked voice was clearer, but behind it was something else, a faint, rhythmic echo, a deep hollow hump, hump, like a giant's heartbeat. "What is that?" Rostova asked, leaning in. "Artillery?" No, Sharma said, her gaze unwavering. It's wind. Wind moving through a specific geological formation. K2 Ridge is granite, it doesn't echo like that. That sound comes from the Zagermar Spires, 10 kilometers to the southeast. They're a series of sandstone hoodoos. The locals call them the Devil's Pipe Organ. The wind makes that sound only when it comes from the northwest, as it is in this storm. She pointed to a spot on the map far from the blinking red icon. Ghost 7 isn't on K2 Ridge. The ambush pushed them off the southern face. They're down in the gorge below the spires. Their beacon signal is bouncing off the canyon walls, giving a false reading. They're pinned down here. Thorne stared at her, dumbfounded. That's impossible. Our signals intelligence is state-of-the-art. Your signals intelligence is reading a ghost. I am listening to the terrain, Sharma replied flatly. She turned away from the hollow display and strode to a dusty cabinet in the corner of the JOC. She pulled out a large, rolled-up paper map and spread it across an empty console. It was an old, Soviet-era topographical survey, detailed and marked with annotations in Cyrillic. The main approach to that gorge is through the Ulgon Valley, she continued, her finger tracing a path on the weathered paper. That's where the enemy will expect a relief force. It's a natural choke point, a death trap. Her finger moved, tracing a hair-thin line over a jagged, impossible-looking ridgeline. But here there's another way, the old goat herder's path. It's not on any of our digital maps because it's considered impassable for troops. It's a knife-edge traverse, exposed to the storm. But it bypasses the valley completely and drops you onto the high ground directly above the gorge. She looked up, not at Thorne, but directly at Rostova. Her calm, gray eyes held the captain's gaze. The storm that has grounded your air support is also your cover. The enemy won't be looking for anyone on that ridge in this weather. You can move along it, establish overwatch, and engage the ambush force from a superior position, creating a window for Ghost 7 to break contact and exfiltrate westward, toward the rendezvous point I am marking now. She made a small X on the map with a grease pencil. It's a 20-kilometer route on foot, in a blizzard with a climb of 2,000 meters. You'll have to move fast and carry light. You have a 4-hour window before the storm's core passes and the wind shifts. If you are not on that ridge by 0700, you will be exposed and compromised. It's your only chance. It's their only chance. The JOC was utterly silent. Sharma had not raised her voice. She had not postured or demanded. She had simply, methodically, and brilliantly dissected an impossible situation and laid out a single, terrifyingly audacious solution. She spoke with the absolute certainty of a master chess player who sees the entire board 10 moves ahead. Rostova stared at the line on the map, her operator's mind calculating the risks, the sheer physical toll of what was being asked. It was insane. It was suicidal. And she knew, with a sudden, chilling clarity, that it was also correct. Colonel Thorne finally found his voice, sputtering with indignation and wounded pride. Now you listen to me. You are a civilian contractor. You have no authority here. I am in command of this FOB, and I will not send my best team on some suicide mission based on a sound on the wind and a dusty old map. He stepped between Sharma and Rostova's team, trying to reassert his broken control. Who in the hell do you think you are? Sharma looked at Colonel Thorne. For the first time, a flicker of something, not anger, but a profound weariness, crossed her face. She didn't answer him. Instead, she turned and walked away from the command console. Her footsteps were quiet and even on the tiled floor. The entire room watched her, a collective breath held in suspension. She didn't head for the exit. She walked toward the bank of storage lockers at the rear of the JOC, where high-value personal equipment was kept. She stopped in front of a small, anonymous gray locker, the same one she'd been assigned upon her arrival. Rostova, Tanaka, and Martinez followed her with their eyes, a dawning, confused apprehension on their faces. What was she doing? Sharma worked the combination lock, the metallic clicks unnaturally loud in the silence. She swung the door open. She reached inside, past the simple gray towel and toiletries kit, and pulled out her black duffel bag. She placed it on a nearby bench and unzipped it with a single smooth pull. She reached inside and her hand emerged not with a file or a laptop, but with a folded piece of dark green fabric. She shook it out. It was an Army service uniform jacket, perfectly pressed, the material holding its shape as if it were carved from wood. She turned her back to them for a moment, shrugging off the sterile fatigue top she had worn since her arrival. Underneath, she wore a simple, olive-drab t-shirt. Her back was a roadmap of old scars, thin white lines that crisscrossed her shoulders and spine, testaments to a history no one in that room could have imagined. Then, she turned back and slipped her arms into the sleeves of the jacket. She settled it on her shoulders with a practiced, familiar motion. She buttoned it. The effect was instantaneous and staggering. The room seemed to contract around her. The unassuming clerk, the quiet archivist, was gone. In her place stood a figure of immense, undeniable authority. On each shoulder was a constellation of silver, for stars polished to a brilliant shine. Below the ribbons on her left breast was a black nameplate with a single, stark word in white lettering, Sharma. The ribbons themselves were a silent, devastating biography. The Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star with 4 oak leaf clusters, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star with a V for Valor, Purple Hearts, decades of service and sacrifice, displayed in a language every soldier understood. Colonel Thorne's face went white, the blood draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. He looked as though he'd been physically struck. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Rostova felt a cold shock travel down her spine. Her mind, trained to process threats in milliseconds, was struggling to catch up. Sharma. General Sharma. Not just any general. General Anya Sharma. The name echoed from her days at the academy, a name spoken in hushed, reverent tones. The architect of Operation Nightfall, the legendary wraith of the Zagermar campaign 2 decades earlier. A Black Ops victory so decisive and so secret, it was taught only as a theoretical case study in unconventional warfare. A living legend who had supposedly retired years ago. Rostova looked at the woman, the general, and saw her for the first time. The quiet demeanor was not meekness. It was control. The lines around her eyes were not from age. They were from decades of peering through spotting scopes and at satellite imagery. The calloused hands were not from filing papers. They were from a lifetime of holding the tools of war. Every condescending look, every whispered joke, every dismissive gesture from the past 2 days flashed through Rostova's mind. The archivist, grandma, the casual cruelty of their arrogance was now laid bare, and she felt a profound, burning shame. She, who prided herself on her perception, had been utterly, catastrophically blind. Tanaka and Martinez stood frozen, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and horror. They had mocked a god of their own pantheon without even knowing it. The locker room, the mess hall, the gym, every interaction was now reframed, cast in the mortifying light of their own ignorance. General Sharma finished buttoning her jacket. She gave the sleeves a slight tug, settling the weight of command back onto her shoulders. She looked up, her pale gray eyes sweeping across the stunned faces in the JOC. They landed once again on Colonel Thorne. "You asked who I am, Colonel," she said, her voice the same calm, low timbre as before, yet now it carried the crushing weight of the 4 stars on her shoulders. "I am the officer who wrote the book on high-altitude winter warfare in this region. I am the one who authorized the very existence of this FOB 20 years ago, and for the next 7 hours, I am the supreme commander of this operation. Your command is hereby temporarily suspended due to your demonstrated inability to adapt under pressure. You will stand down and you will not interfere." She didn't wait for a reply. She didn't need one. Thorne simply nodded, his face slack with shock, and took a stumbling step backward, effectively ceding the command floor. Sharma's gaze shifted to Rostova. The general's expression was unreadable, holding neither condemnation nor forgiveness. There was only the mission. "Captain Rostova," she said, her voice now crisp and clear, the voice of command. Your team has its route and its objective. The plan is not a suggestion. You will maintain absolute calm silence until you are in position on the ridge. Your signal for engagement will be a single burst transmission of the word, Midnight Ghost. 7 will know what it means. They will be listening for it. Do you have any questions? Rostova's mind snapped back into focus. The shame, the shock. She pushed it all down. There was a mission. Men were dying. The general had given them a chance. A sliver of hope in an impossible situation. That was all that mattered now. She drew herself up to her full height, her posture rigid, her eyes locked on Sharma's. No, General, Rostova said, her voice sharp and clear, stripped of all its previous arrogance. No questions. Then get your team moving. You are wasting daylight you don't have. Yes, General. Rostova spun on her heel. Tanaka, Martinez, let's go. Her team, jolted from their stupor, moved with a speed and efficiency they had never before displayed. They grabbed their packs and rifles, their movements precise and economical. The casual swagger was gone, replaced by a grim, focused determination. They were no longer the cocky kings of their small mountain fortress. They were instruments of a will far greater and more experienced than their own. As they rushed out of the JOC and into the raging blizzard, the last thing Rostova saw was the still figure of General Sharma, a lone, gray rock in the center of the storm, her gaze fixed on the old paper map that held their lives in her hands. The respect had not been requested. It had been seized by the sheer, undeniable force of competence. The JOC, once a hub of chaotic indecision, was now a place of silent, focused energy. General Sharma stood at the center of it, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of violence from half a world away. She had Thorne's executive officer, a capable but previously overlooked major named Calloway, feeding her real-time atmospheric data. She had the young comms tech monitoring every dead frequency, hunting for the faintest electronic whisper from the gorge. She had turned Colonel Thorne's paralyzed command center into her personal instrument. Thorne himself sat in his office, the door ajar, watching the woman he had dismissed as a clerk command his post with an effortless mastery he could only dream of. He was a ghost in his own headquarters. For hours, there was nothing but the howl of the wind outside and the hum of the electronics inside. Sharma did not sit. She stood before the old paper map, occasionally cross-referencing it with the digital display, her eyes tracing the route Rostova's team was taking. She seemed to feel every step they took, anticipating the ice-slicked ledges, the treacherous cornices, the energy-sapping cold. Major Calloway, she said, her voice cutting the silence. Give me thermal overlays for Grid Square 47 Charlie. Focus on the western face of the gorge. Calloway's fingers flew. A grainy heat signature map appeared on a secondary screen. Nothing, General. The storm is causing too much interference. It's just a whiteout. Refine the filter, Sharma ordered, not taking her eyes off the main map. Look for clusters, not individual signatures. The enemy won't be exposed. They'll be huddled for warmth behind rock outcroppings. Look for patches of slightly less cold. Calloway adjusted his parameters. Slowly, 3 faint, amorphous blobs of pale blue emerged from the static gray. They were almost invisible, a fractional temperature difference. General, I think I have something. 3 possible positions, consistent with squad-sized elements. They're positioned to cover the floor of the gorge perfectly. Good, Sharma said. It wasn't praise, just an acknowledgement of data received. They're exactly where I thought they'd be. She had anticipated the enemy's positions based on the terrain and the doctrine of the local insurgent commander, a man she had personally tracked 15 years prior. She knew how he thought. Another hour crawled by. The sun, a pale, unseen disk behind the storm clouds, began its descent. The window was closing. Rostova's team should have been nearing the ridge. Suddenly, the comms tech ripped off his headset. General, I have a signal. A microburst transmission, heavily encrypted, but it's on Ghost 7's frequency. Put it on the main speaker, Sharma commanded. A single, distorted word filled the JOC. Midnight. A wave of relief washed over the room. Rostova was in position. Phase 1 was complete. Sharma keyed her own microphone, her voice a low, calm command that bypassed the local network and went straight to a dedicated satellite channel. Ghost 7, this is Wraith. Midnight is called. Break west to Rendezvous Sierra. Egress now. Acknowledge. A few seconds of tense silence followed. Then, another burst of static, and a new voice, laced with exhaustion and disbelief. Wraith? God, copy that. Ghost 7 is on the move. The voice belonged to the team leader of Ghost 7. A master sergeant who had been a young private when General Sharma was last in this theater under her old call sign. For him, hearing that name was like hearing a voice from legend. It was a promise that they were not alone. Sharma turned to Calloway. Major, get me a line to the 101st Combat Aviation Brigade at Bagram. I'm requisitioning 2 Apache gunships and a Pave-Low for immediate launch the moment this weather breaks. Their target coordinates will be the 3 positions you identified. She was already planning the cleanup, the next move in a game only she could see. The battle in the gorge was fought by sound and shadow. Rostova's team, perched on the ridge like avenging angels, unleashed hell upon the unsuspecting enemy positions below. Their suppressors made the rifle fire almost silent, lost in the roar of the wind. They were ghosts, firing from within the heart of the storm. They could see the muzzle flashes of the ambushing force, who were still firing blindly into the gorge, convinced Ghost 7 was still trapped there. Down below, Ghost 7 used the cacophony as their cover, scrambling over rocks and through snowdrifts, moving west toward the escape route the general had designated. The fight was short, brutal, and entirely one-sided. Rostova's team, guided by a plan of impossible genius, broke the enemy force in under 10 minutes, then melted back into the blizzard before any coordinated response was possible. They were a phantom fist that had struck from nowhere and vanished. 2 hours later, the storm broke as quickly as it had arrived. The first rays of dawn were spearing through the shattered clouds, painting the snow-covered peaks in hues of orange and pink. The low thumping of helicopter rotors grew louder as Rostova's team, with the 4 battered but living members of Ghost 7, approached the FOB. General Sharma was not in the JOC. She was standing alone on the tarmac, wearing only her uniform jacket against the biting cold. She had no entourage, no saluting subordinates. She just stood and waited. The Pave-Low touched down, its ramp dropping before the rotors had fully spooled down. The rescued soldiers of Ghost 7 emerged first, limping, frostbitten, but alive. They were followed by Rostova, Tanaka, and Martinez. They were coated in ice and grime, their faces etched with a fatigue so deep it was structural. Rostova saw the general waiting. She dismissed her team and walked toward the solitary figure, her boots crunching on the frozen tarmac. She stopped 3 feet from Sharma. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind only the bone-deep weariness and the lingering shame of her earlier behavior. There were no words that could fix what she had done. There was only the here and now. She drew her shoulders back, brought her heels together, and executed the sharpest, most precise salute of her life. It was more than regulation. It was an apology. It was an oath. It was a gesture of absolute, unequivocal respect for the quiet, graying woman who had saved them all. General Sharma looked at the young captain. She saw the exhaustion, the regret, and the newfound humility in her eyes. She did not smile. She simply raised her hand in a slow, deliberate salute, returning the gesture. She held it for a moment, her pale gray eyes meeting Rostova's, and in that shared glance, a silent understanding passed between them. Then, she dropped her hand and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. The gesture said everything that needed to be said. Mission accomplished. Job well done. Now carry on. Later that night, long after the debriefs were finished and the quiet hum of routine had returned to FOB Peregrine, the women's locker room was empty and silent. The air was still cold, but the lingering scent of mockery was gone, replaced by the sterile cleanliness of a space wiped clean. General Sharma sat alone on the simple wooden bench. The overhead fluorescent lights cast long shadows on the concrete floor. She had her sidearm, a well-worn M17 pistol, disassembled on a clean gray towel in front of her. Her movements were slow, methodical, and deeply ingrained. She cleaned each component, the slide, the barrel, the recoil spring, with a practiced efficiency that was a form of meditation. Each wipe of the oilcloth was a memory. Cleaning this same model of weapon in the dust of Iraq, in the freezing mud of Bosnia, in the humid jungles of places that didn't officially exist on any map. The rhythmic scrape of the brush in the barrel was a sound that had grounded her through decades of chaos. It was a ritual of control in a life defined by its absence. She was not thinking of Colonel Thorne's humiliated deference, or of the wide-eyed awe from the young operators who now parted before her like the sea. She was not thinking of the report she would have to write, a report that would quietly and professionally end Thorne's career and likely recommend Rostova for a commendation. She was thinking of the 4 young soldiers of Ghost 7, now sleeping safely in the medical bay. She was thinking of the weight of their lives, a weight she had chosen to bear time and time again. The stars on her shoulders were not a crown. They were a burden, each one a constellation of lives she was responsible for. She finished reassembling the pistol, the final click of the slide locking into place sounding loud in the stillness. She performed a function check, her hands moving with an intimacy born of a lifetime of familiarity. Satisfied, she holstered the weapon. She sat for a moment longer on the bench, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees. She looked at her reflection in the small, polished metal mirror on Martinez's locker. The face that looked back was tired, lined, and gray. It was the face of the archivist, the face of the wraith, the face of a general. They were all the same person. The uniform, the rank, the legend, they were just labels others used to try and understand. The truth of her was in the quiet, methodical action, in the calm at the heart of the storm. The first hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky, visible through the small, high window of the locker room. Another day was beginning. For General Anya Sharma, it was no different from any other. There was always a watch to stand, a weapon to clean, a storm to navigate. She stood up, gathered her cleaning kit, and walked out of the locker room, her footsteps echoing softly in the silence, leaving behind nothing but the faint, clean scent of gun oil and the weight of an earned, unspoken reverence.